Patch 14.15, the first patch of the set has been out. And this patch went from, alright, Syndra's kind of broken, and, you know, it's not that bad, to, holy fuck, Syndra's in literally every game. This patch fucking dog shit. It feels like multicast from set 9 low-key. This patch is totally not it. But that doesn't mean that there aren't still some ways to still deviate and play things that can still win you out. So in today's video, we're going to be doing a mid-patch analysis. I know the thumbnail is full Syndra, but I promise it's not really just all Syndra. There are some things that you can still play around. So first off, Zoe reroll. In the first meta analysis, we briefly covered it, and we talked about Witchy Wallop, which is Poppy's hero augment. But nowadays, people have realized that, hey, you can play Zoe 3, Poppy 3 if you have Spellblades, and specifically Spellblades. I think 2-1 Spellblades, if you don't have this augment, this line gets significantly worse. So please be aware. I think, personally speaking, I think a lot of us saw Sub-Zero's video where he covered Spencer playing this line, and I mean, everybody got hyped. We're like, oh shit, it's not Syndra and it can win now games. Like, oh god, like this looks kind of good. And then you played it, and then you realize, holy fucking shit, I leaned this way too hard because this line's really mid. Unless you have Spellblades, it feels kind of fucking dookie. I'm pretty sure my scores with it are like 2-7-7-7-7-1-2, like something like that. It's very polarizing. In terms of the items, blue buff is very, very crucial. Some of the reasons why I think I was buff warring with this comp is because I was too liberal with my itemization. Blue buff on Zoe is like incredibly important. You really do need it with the damage amplification. And Nash's as well. You just want her to be casting quite a bit. Rabadon's +1 is usually Biss. Poppy is usually the main tank, but it really depends on your tempo. Nowadays, with the current meta, we're seeing a lot of HP preservation. So you really want to preserve your HP as much as possible, because not only just stage 2, but stage 3 and stage 4, actually more specifically, if anything, it's very real. There's a lot of agency, and you can't just like kind of sit there, jerk off, do nothing, and then once 4-2 hits, you're like, oh, time to turn my brain on, right? Nowadays, stage 3 really matters, and you're seeing a lot more players playing with a lot more agency, specifically on 3-2, on 3-5, these standard intervals, but even just like slight rolling when they're sitting on off interval gold during stage 3 and stage 4. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot of mid-game agency now, which is fantastic, by the way. Like I've been playing since like set 7. I've never felt mid-game agency until this patch, until set 12. So this, so far, like, I know things are out of tune, but quite honestly, I'm kind of enjoying set 12. I can't believe I'm saying that. You're like, oh shit. But anyways, that's basically it for this comp. Just so you know, the Arcana bonus always goes onto Ari. You do it on Ari because you have so many 3-stars that you actually get so much AP. I think it's somewhere between the ranges of like, it's like 30 to 50, somewhere in that range. It's a lot of AP to put on your board. So make sure you Arcana Ari properly, and you should be good to go. And again, because of HP preservation, you might be itemizing your Lilia first. That's totally okay. It is what it is. 4 Bastions first, and then you play into 4 Scholar. Portal gets activated through the Rise and the Taric that you eventually find later on at level 8. Ideally, level 8 is really the big spike, because that's when you get the 4 Bastion, 4 Scholar, and that's when everything really comes online. Again, Spellblades only, in my personal opinion. I fucking hate this comp outside of Spellblades. I think it's actually pretty mid, but sometimes people will play from like an insane spot, and it's, you know, it's not a end-all be-all, but just, you know, maybe 95% of the time, if I don't have Spellblades, I'm probably not thinking about this. Moving on to the second one, which is Warwick reroll. Warwick reroll, we briefly talked about it in the last meta-analysis. We brought up that Corrupted Vamp Step is like a Warwick item, and if you get it, you can actually hard force this line and do decently well. I think it's slightly harder nowadays because Vanguard is like so important, and we'll touch up on that later. But it can be a little bit harder to find your Vanguards, especially during the mid-game, but Warwick reroll is still very, very real. If you get Portable Forge from 2-1, I was actually looking at the stats earlier, they actually aren't that bad. I'm not even kidding. Portable Forge at 2-1. Maybe it is bad. Okay, maybe not. It's probably not worth the gold augment. It's also, I don't know why you're ever taking Forge really at 2-1. It's not really worth the gold augment. But if you're in that portal that gives an artifact anvil, then I think you can take it. I thought it was fine, but I guess it's not fine. So that's probably like the only time you're ever gonna see this line. But if you get it, great. This is a really fun line. It's just vertical vanguards. You can just tech in 3 frost. It's really whatever else you find. I wouldn't be surprised if someone told me, hey, just play fucking Syndra 2 in the back anyways, and that's your board, and I wouldn't be surprised. It's just vanguards with Syndra, I guess. But Olaf is fine. You can also do vertical frost, which Generically speaking, Vertical Frost is actually dog shit. It's actually terrible, but for some reason with Warwick 3, 7 Frost seems to be okay, but I wouldn't really lean that. If you can, try to go with the Vanguards first. Also, Vanguards is just, in general, easier to hit. There's so many copies, so many low-cost units, so that's basically it. In terms of itemizations, it's QSS Ginsu's with Vamp Step. That's really the only time you'll ever really go with this. There are probably other variations, but Ginsu's is definitely a must, and you obviously cannot play this without Vamp Step there. So QSS, maybe you could have a little bit of leeway there, but typically if you want a unit to just keep autoing, just getting CC'd is the biggest obstacle you'll come across. So just make sure that, you know, if you can get the QSS, you should try to greet it as much as possible. Moving on. Oh, and last thing, Zap Attack. If you get Zap Attack and Vamp Step, sure, feel free to fucking try it out. Haven't seen anybody run it, but I could definitely see it being viable, so just keep that in mind. Olaf has a TG here because Olaf too, it's fine. I think he's an okay TG holder. He actually has a worse rep than you would expect out of a forecast of his power, because he's actually not that bad. It's just that everything else is so much better that his relative strength of like a decent forecast just feels like it's just falling flat, if that makes sense. Let's see. Moving on. Going over to the 2-cost rerolls. Let's see. First is kog'maw reroll. This is still very, very prevalent and still very, very real. You can definitely play kog'maw right now, and this is one of the very few lines that is not fucking Syndra. You might hear a lot of people saying, hey, if you're not playing Syndra, you're not playing kog'maw, and you're not playing Karma, fast level 8, you're gonna buff 4. And that's because kog'maw is actually kind of decent. But if you are contested for this line, don't ever fucking try playing it, because this feels like fucking shit. But overall, it's really simple. Kog'maw is just Last Whisper. Red buff can be Shojin. It's literally either or. I think Shojin is slightly better in the stats, but it's also just because red buff is really hard to get on top of Last Whisper, because that's 3 bows. It's a lot of fucking bows. But contested Cog fucking sucks. IE can be last, GS can be last. It does not really matter. He has a lot of flexibility with his itemizations. Just make sure that, by the way, his backline, because of his passive, you want to make sure that your secondary carry, typically Tristana 3, is adjacent to Kog'maw, because they will get the extra attack speed. I believe it's 20%, well, it's 30% if you get the 3-star Kog'maw, so there you go. Main tank is typically Rumble 3, but because Vanguards is insanely contested, I don't know how likely it is you'll be finding this, but you shouldn't be playing this from a bad spot anyways. So if you have a bunch of copies of Rumble, which you likely do, Rumble 3 will be your main tank. I had previously stated in the last meta-analysis that I wasn't sure how good Rumble 3 is as a main tank. He's pretty fucking good. So feel free to go with Rumble 3. It's good enough. Nunu 3 can also be a substitute, but I would argue that Bastions in general just feel weaker than Vanguard. At least that's my personal opinion, but especially when you're playing around 3 costs, or rather 3 stars, and you're playing Vanguard, which gives, I believe, its damage, its durability, which is the new special term for damage reduction. But because damage reduction is really good with units with large amounts of HP and high resistances, that's why 2 Vanguard, in my personal opinion, feels better than 2 Bastion, which is just like some flat resistances. If I remember correctly, I think it's like 10 armor MR. Sorry, 15. And then your whole team gets a little bit of extra. So it's fine, but if you can, try to go for Rumble 3. Not much else really needs to be said here. You could also play this with Zap Attack, funny enough. Sweet Tooth as well is really, really good. This is Nunu's hero augment. At any point, you can click on this. It's totally fine. Makes a lot of sense. And Nunu can be your secondary carry instead of a Tristana 3. Tristana 3, by the way, is fine. You don't really want her as your main carry, but she's good enough that, like, if you get a lot of Tristana copies early and you think you can 3-star her early, feel free to itemize her and then just worry about the cog later down the line, but just make sure you have some way to get your items as the game progresses. Nunu itemization in general, there is a TG here, but with Sweet Tooth specifically, it's usually something along the lines of BT Archangels +1, typically a tank item. Something like Redemption sounds very good to me. Sorry, I'm struggling to find the Archangels. There it is. You get the idea. Very simple comp. I think most players are aware of this line, so I'm going to leave it at that. Next one is multi-strikers with Kassadin, or Kassadin. Jesus. I don't know why I started saying Kassadin. Kassadin reroll. This comp is slowly falling out of the meta, even though it's still very good and you can still very much do well with it. The reason why it's falling out is just because it's, generically speaking, like, just not that great into Syndra. Syndra in general is actually really good at countering this comp, because all you have to do if you're playing Syndra and you're, you know, against a Kass player, is just positioning your Syndra 2, your main carry, which is probably going to be a 2-star, but this is basically a 4.5 cost, on top of the Kassadin. If you position it like this, she will immediately start casting onto the Kassadin, lock targets, and eventually never stop until Kassadin is dead. And it's very easy to nuke him, and then there's nothing much else that needs to be said. Kassadin, I believe, has a good matchup. No. Kog'maw is a good matchup into Kassadin, but because Kassadin is becoming less meta because it's not good into Syndra, Kog is seeing less play as well because, or Kog feels like slightly worse because it's good into Kassadin, but it's, yeah, not, it's, you know, whatever into Syndra. Another thing to note real quick is that with this comp, QSS, BT, and Ginsu's is the main way that people have been building Kassadin, but I believe I talked about this last time too, but I think Rabadon's is actually really, really good and underrated. This is one of my favorite ways to itemize Kassadin. It's specifically these 3 items. If you have like an open rod, but you have like a Hodge here instead, maybe you just go with the Ginsu's. But generically speaking, QSS, BT, Rabadons, I like this a lot. It feels really, really good in my opinion. I'm not too sure about the stats on it. I'm a little worried about looking at it, but from anecdotal experience, this has always felt insanely good, and sometimes even better than Ginsu's. I understand the argument is that Ginsu's like helps like break and whittle down the tank because it just keeps autoing and ramping, but I still think in most scenarios you'll be fine. Rabadon's is the way to go. Another thing to note is Akali positioning. People are getting better at positioning Akali to the point where we are starting to slowly understand why Akali will sometimes leap and then kill your backline, and then suddenly you just lost the fight. Akali can really sweep fights, and the main rule of thumb is this. The way that her ability works is that she dashes to the farthest target within 3 hexes. So, if you are, let's say you are the Akali player, right? And this is your opponent, and let's say their Syndra was their main carry. Oh, she just disappeared, just like Akali would, but that's a little bit early. The plot isn't there yet. Let's say it's something like this, right? Let's just put like an item on her so she just looks a little more, you know, a little more menacing. But the Akali, starting from this hex, will go 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, I believe, and then it'll pop here, right? 1, 2, 3 hexes, targeting one of these 3, right? Or one of these 2 rather. And then she'll cast again 1, 2, 3. And then it's either Norra or the Syndra. But because I believe the Syndra is technically the farthest, because Norra is 2, but Syndra is 3 hexes away, she will dash to the Syndra and then eliminate the Syndra. And then suddenly, if you're the Syndra player, you're like shitting yourself. Like, oh fuck, like there's a Akali's on my backline and everything died. So when you're playing as Akali, you want to generically position A3 and A5, assuming that your opponent is cornering their units. If they are on the opposite corner, let's say it's this side, then you're going to probably want to be on this side, because most cases, especially with the Syndra meta, which is a lot of specifically 4 frontliners, and typically they're lined up in just a straight row, you can really abuse this positioning and then just go for the Syndra and just like basically snipe it every time. It's not super reliable, but I would say like most cases, obviously there's so many variables that go on. Maybe they have a voidling, maybe they got training dummies, maybe they're positioned their Nami or Yumi here for some reason, and then like things get like fucking wonky. It's tough, but generically speaking, these are the 2 hexes you want to place in. But here's how you counter it if you are playing into an Akali player. If your opponent is playing Akali, you want to put your carry in the middle, specifically if they're, again, positioning in either, I'm going to use notation here, A3 or A5. If the Akali is A3 or A5, you want to position carry in the middle. That way, after a cast like this, it will most likely go into one of the corners here. In some scenarios, it will actually go here, and then it'll dash to this unit that's adjacent to your carry, but it won't actually kill it, and then it'll actually, usually, most of the times, get enough mana, cast backwards again, and your carry is safe. That is from what I've noticed from the games that I've played. And then, to counter this, if you're the Akali player, is that you position middle. Because if you go like this, it goes 1, 2, 3, and then it goes 1, 2, 3. And then it goes to the middle, or it can go to the corner. It depends. Sometimes, again, there's a lot of variables that happen, but that's your generic rule of thumb. So, let's recap. If you are playing Akali, and your opponent has to carry in the middle, you position Akali middle. If you are playing Akali, and your opponent positions their carry on the corners, either or, does not matter, you position on either A3 or A5 on the opposite side. So, it'll be something like this, 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. That makes sense? Good. It's basically leapfrog. And again, if you're trying to counter it, if your opponent has Akali here, go middle here. Just make sure there's an adjacent unit. And opposite is also true. If they're in the middle, don't go middle. You can go like somewhere like here. That's probably fine. I generically speaking, don't like positioning in the corner anyways. Akali does weird shit sometimes. But I believe it should jump to the corner anyways if you position like this. So it should be okay. But this is like the big one. Thanks for the tip. I usually place B1 or B7 it feels so random. Yeah, so typically you definitely want to put it in the front line. That's also why you like GA a lot on Akali, because with GA on Akali, she basically, if she goes like here, which I don't know if you've seen like the Katarina 3 reroll game that we covered on the channel, but basically Katarina will sometimes dash here and then just die. The GA is really nice for her because she likes the stats and she will just like, you know, drop aggro and then just do her thing. So Yeah, that's like the main thing that we've noticed. If anybody has any rebuttal for that, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This is still very early tech, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is, but this has been sort of the deduction from both our study group from TFT, but also just from my own anecdotal experiences watching, replaying and watching our own, or my own fights when I saw the Akali was trying to obliterate my backlines. But anyways, sorry, that went on a bit longer than I would have liked. Last thing to note, real quick, press the attack, always click this augment, and it's basically a casted in free reroll for fun. And you can usually like top 3 pretty comfortably. Moving on, Nilah reroll. I think this is like not as bad as people think it is. You can definitely like scam your way into top 4s. It's usually like a 3rd or 4th. It never wins out. But you can definitely do well with this, assuming that you get a lot of Nilahs and like nobody's really like. I mean, the thing is like usually someone's playing Kassadin and you're like, oh shit, someone's playing Kassadin, but I already selected BT. What do? I have a lot of copies of Nilah. Maybe I can play Nilah reroll, and then this is honestly from what I've seen, it's fine. It's not amazing. It's fine. It's probably a 3rd or 4th, but you're gonna play Kassadin and then you got heavily contested and they hit. So what's your plan now, doofus? It's like what, you bot 2 or you play Nilah reroll? Might as well like fuck it, right? You might as well just see what happens. And then you can greet their Akalis, and then like you know the positioning text, it should help you out a lot. Like you should be fine. Again, still fine. You just tech into 4 warrior. That's sort of like the cap with this board. It's pretty low cap in my opinion. That's why it's also like not that great, but it's good enough. It'll get you your top 4s when you need it, especially in low tempo lobbies. And especially in low elo, I wouldn't be surprised if you abuse this in low elo and like you could just like start climbing like pretty fast, because it's a comp that's not too heavily contested. No one's ever really holding this Nilah unit ever, and a lot of 2-costs get taken out of the pool because Syndra, because of Kassadin, because of kog'maw. You get the idea. So, still decently solid. Finally, deja vu with Galio. Like, dude, like honestly speaking, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this line. I think this shit is kind of mid, to be completely honest. I think unless your spot is insanely good, and you already have the items for it, and you already have the vanguard start, and you already have Galio 2 and 2-1, sure. But like all things considered, I've never seen this line top 4 since like the first couple of days of the patch. So I would take this with a grain of salt, and only if your spot is really good, and only if you're so goddamn tired of playing Syndra, then you can consider playing this line. It's just Ginsu's Gunblade Archangels, I think, but double Ginsu's Archangels or double like Ginsu's GS Gunblade, like the itemization is pretty flexible. I think this is true best in my opinion, but I think it's totally okay. Moving on, standard compositions. This is the graphic that we used last time, except there is a slight difference. If you don't remember, basically the core for your level 8 board is going to be these 5, or it was actually rather these 4 units, but now it's become these 5 units. Basically, any Syndra you have in the early game, you want to start stacking, you want to carry as soon as possible, and then you can build around it, and it really depends on what you're going for. If you're not finding that early Syndra, and too many people have it, and you can't stack it fast enough, typically, by the way, the rule of thumb is, from what I understand, 3-2 is the latest you can start stacking a Syndra. That's because of the way that DQA approaches it, where he typically open forts into playing Syndra, and then he seems to be doing fine. He was rank 3 last time I checked. You can also like, as long as like if you're stacking as well, you can also like really get the best items you want on it. So things like Shojin Nashers, red buff, Ginsu's has been popping up quite a bit. I think that's totally acceptable. That's fine. It's just mana gen as much as possible. Blue buff is actually like okay in like some really tough situations where your item economy is getting like really gigafucked for some reason. That's fine. But the idea is that you really want to find a Syndra by 3-2, itemize it if you can, and then start stacking it, because once it hits like that 45, that 60, that 90, it's really starting to really amp and really carry itself as like almost like a 4.5 cost. But anyways, this is the main core, and then you can build whatever. And quite honestly, you don't even need the Rakan, you don't even need the Morgana anymore. Like, preservers, generically speaking, are not even that good. I think people have realized that, like, 4-cost Rakan, it was really good during the PvE, but people have come to realize that, like, hey, like, as a tank, this unit fucking sucks. Like, it just kind of explodes and dies. So I think a lot of people are sort of leaning towards more Nasus as sort of, like, your 2-star 4-cost as your main tank, because not only is Nasus the best feeling, you know, sorry to use not very scientific terminology here, but Nasus 2 feels pretty fucking good. So I mean, at least as a 2-star 4-cost tank. And then it actually opens up Briar or Briar. I forget the fucking, I don't know. You guys like roasted me for like the pronunciation last time. I don't know what it is, but the ghostly bitch with the toes, 5-cost. You know who I'm talking about. Her CC, her AoE is really good, and she's a fantastic TG holder. And early game, if you happen to find her like stage 3, stage 4 for some reason, you're just high rolling, and you have the HP to spare. start feeding her. I actually think feeding Briar, I'm gonna call her Brian because at this point I give up. But feeding Brian is good because if you feed Brian early game, you can sort of like prepare to play around shapeshifters. And I actually think this Brian unit does like a lot of fucking damage, a lot of fucking work, a lot of CC, by the way. That's super underrated. So really strong unit. When it comes to playing around 4 costs, again, you do want to dual carry. It's always Karma plus 1 other carry, whether that be Callista if you find an early Camille, whether that be Nami Norra, which is sort of like the main line, which is sort of what everybody is sort of playing right now. So especially in Syndra. So if you know, maybe stay away from this if you have to play around 4 costs only and no Syndra. Fiora Gwen is also the main standard line with 4 costs nowadays, but this has become less and less popular because it's so expensive, and unless you're kind of high rolling hitting your units fast, it's really difficult to stabilize with this before you've bled too much HP and you inevitably lose to a Syndra 3 player, which sucks. I'm sorry, this is just the meta. Lastly is Arcana. This is the highest cap. I would only lean this if you find like a really early Xerath 2, like, and even then it's like, I mean, if you have Xerath 2, like, sure, but like I mean, like, that's a ridiculous condition on 8, so you get the idea. But that is basically the way that this goes down. Again, we'll give you examples. This was the Fiora Gwen. We covered this in the last one as well, but very simply, it's just 4 Witch, and it's actually 3 Preserver on 8. You don't really play the Bard, and in most cases, you just tech in something better. So, like, Shapeshifters, for example, you end up playing, like, Briar. I think it's Briar. I'm gonna say Briar. Fighting my demons with this one. But, anyways, probably Briar, and then this is chill. Totally fine, and very acceptable. You can also do Nasus as well if you're like lacking a tank as well. That's fine. This Recon unit, again, really fucking dog. I would actually like do this and maybe even drop Gwen during stage 8, level 8, because of, wow, just an absolute jambalaya of vocabulary today. But just because like this Recon unit, like it feels really fake now. Before it felt pretty good, especially during the PP it felt good, but as people got better at the game and as people have started to optimize their boards better and build stronger boards, Recon just falls flat, to be completely honest. So I'm okay with like not itemizing this ever and just going with Nasus too. I think it's totally okay. Another example as well is if you find that early Camille, again, it's Callista with Camille, Nasus 2 as your main tank. I like Akali a lot more. I think if during the early parts of the patch, people were playing Jax as the multistriker here. That way it opens up 4 chrono. But I actually think getting a little bit of bonus attack speed from Infernal plus a little bit of that multistriker in there, I think this is fine. It's a huge straight up, but so is Jax. And 4 chrono, I think that people have realized, fucking shit. It's not supported in the stats. It's not that good. It doesn't feel that good. And it doesn't even buy enough time really for the Camille to do a like insane amount of work. So it's fine, but not the best. Itemization wise, it's kind of whatever you find, i.e. BT, GA, does not matter. Just 1 healing and then whatever the fuck you want does not matter. Totally chill. This is fine. You could even do like Hodge IE. That's probably fine as well. I mean, at this point in the game, you're probably not like you're not thinking about itemizing a Camille on your 4-2 roll down because the likelihood of you finding one is pretty low. So yeah, that's basically how that goes down. Finally, one last thing to note is one standard comp which does exist, which is the Varus shapeshifters. This still exists, but it only exists if you find a pyro emblem, and more specifically is if you find the pyro emblem, as in the portal gave you a spat and you're like, shit, I have an extra bow for some reason, even though bow is like the best component in the game right now. And you're like, okay, might as well just play Varus and play uncontested because nobody plays this shit unless you have a pyro. Shapeshifter seems to be the main line for frontline, but you can pretty much flex the frontline however you want it. I'm sure Vanguards is fine. The only difference is that with Vanguards, you actually don't get the pyro unit in there, so you're gonna have to fit it in somewhere. And also, Nasus 2 is just so good, and 6 is good, and Briar is good. So you might as well just play fucking Shapeshifters. There's no reason not to. Maybe you can play with Bastions. I haven't really tested too much with Bastion frontline, personally speaking. But this Diana unit kind of feels like shit right now, at least from my time playing her. And Taric 2 is okay, but does not feel like Nasus. So I would just stick with Shapeshifters for this one. Moving on with the vertical +1s, this is assuming that you get the +1 from your augment, not necessarily from just the game handing you a spat. First is Witchcraft. We've covered this before. Witchcraft emblem is actually not very well supported in the stats. If I remember correctly, it's hovering right now in high elo at about a 4.6. I could be wrong on that. 4.6. Oh, I'm so smart. 4.6. It gets worse as you go higher though, so keep that in mind. It's not ideal, but it's like takeable in the right spots. As in, like, you have a really strong, like, you have a Zoe 2, and you have like this, you have a Zoe 2 Poppy 2, and you get offered a Witchcraft emblem. You could probably play it from that spot. Is it worth a gold augment? Not necessarily, but again, from the right spots, I think it's fine. You just play Karma, Fiora, Gwen again, but you can be really flexible with it. You can maybe even do like witchcraft Syndra, maybe. I'm not really sure. Like a blue buff Nashor's witchcraft emblem. Maybe. I have not tested it. I have not seen it. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that you could definitely play around. Again, same thing. Nasus is your main tank. Not much else really needs to be said here. It's just vertical witchcraft. Very simple. Moving on, 7 Eldritch. Only playable with school mascot. This was initially good at the beginning of the patch because nobody knew what the fuck was going on. Now that people have realized how the patch actually works and how it operates, don't fucking click Eldritch Crest. It's shit. For lack of a better word, it's like, it's bad. 4.58. It's actually not as bad as it's not as bad as I thought. I thought it was like a 4.7. It's actually 4.5. So it's okay. I apologize. It's not turbo shit. It's just shit. They're just right now. If you don't know, augment stats, there's a huge disparity. Like the really good augments and the really bad augments. It ranges from like 3.7 to like 5.8. They're like what the Forge, I'm pretty sure is the worst augment in the game right now, and it's a prismatic, and I'm pretty sure it averages like a 4.8. It's actually terrible. Or sorry, 5.8. Scholar Crown 2-1, 5.8. The discrepancy is insane. So like you really need to be greedy with your augments. So Eldritch Crest, I'd be hard pressed to think that you don't find something better, like significantly better, like school, like the fucking whatchamacallit, like the support golem. I even like Rain and Gold better, even though it's pretty mid. But you get the idea. But anyways, going back to this, I would only ever play Eldritch if you get School Mascot. School Mascot is still very, very good. It's one of those augments which, again, it was good at the beginning, and it's still, okay, honestly, it's still fucking good. Just click School Mascot. If you can click School Mascot, play 7 Eldritch, very viable line. It lets you play Syndra, so nothing else really needs to be said there. Very simple, very straightforward. 8 Portal. This is like... It was like kind of okay, top 3 most of the time. Now it's like top 4 most of the time. And it's still very playable, don't get me wrong. I still think like from a good spot, I think it's similar to Witchcraft. Like if you have a good portal spot, you could definitely click on this, especially the gold one, and you are chilling. I think the prismatic is slightly worse, and this is again one of those augments that gets worse the higher you climb, but it's very good for noob stomping. So if you want to just have a very simple game, Portal Crest, the fucking gold one, take it, totally fine. But you have to keep in mind, Portal has one of the strongest openers. It has Zoe 2. It has a fucking rift that shoots damage and bombs things. Like, it's fucking sick. Jace 2, one of the best frontliners for 1 cost right now. Really fucking solid unit. So as long as you have the upgrades and you can play tempo with it, you're gonna bleed into like a 3rd or a 4th. But assuming that you're able to hit that Terra 2, that Rise 2 on 8th, and you're still like decently healthy for the most part, this comp is still pretty insanely good. So I would argue this is very, very playable. You just have to know how to play around it. Typically the portal holder is the Vex. That's because it opens up Norra. It doesn't have to be Vex, at least from my understanding. I'm pretty sure you could actually do Nami as well. I don't really see a problem with this. This is fine as well if you want a little bit more of that CC. But okay, no, I just remember the problem. The problem is that you lack frontline, so you kind of do want that Vex in there. Just a little bit of that extra bit. And Nami does provide CC, but not enough to justify like Terra 2 being your solo frontliner, because that sounds like dog shit. Sounds perfectly fine to me. We can start moving on. If you really want to, you can actually just drop... No, you can't drop mages. Nope, this is all you got. Alright, that's it. I guess for that. Last is 6 Sugarcraft. Don't fucking click this shit ever. I think this was something that was good during the... Really good during the PvE. Got nerfed. And then it was like sort of like mid-ish slash like... bad, like B tier, and then people got better at the game, and now it's just falling off a cliff. I would not touch this shit, but I wanted to point it out because I still think people are playing it, and you can play it, and it's fun, and for low elo, I mean, anything's viable in low elo, but just, you've been warned. This is not a very competitive line, so just keep that in mind. Moving on to the final category, which is fucking Syndra, man. This unit, I'm pulling up my match history first, and this is for good reason. The past 20 games, I have hard force Syndra. I am averaging a 4. I am terrible at one-tricking. It's one of my least prevalent skills when it comes to TFT, and it's not something I'm good at, but I'm trying to improve, because specifically for this patch, we need to know how to do it, because snapshots are coming up in like a couple days. So, you can see Execution S, Augments S, Flexibility fucking D, because all I'm playing is Karma and Syndra. I'm not even fucking capping. Syndra, One game of kog'maw, I deviated. I went 5th. I'm sorry. Syndra. Another kog'maw game. Sorry, I went 6th. Syndra. You get the idea. It's basically Syndra 2020, but the way that you approach it is not necessarily the way that you would always approach a 2-cost reroll. As basically what you don't understand is, I made a whole video about this, discussing a little bit more about like the theory behind like how to actually one-trick a comp, and this was something that was really prevalent during the multicaster patch, which we don't know back in set 9. There was a composition known as multicasters, which was disgustingly broken to the point where 4 people could play it and it could support 4 players at the same time. It was a disgusting patch, and it got B patched, and then post B patch, it was not even that much worse. It was actually still like an S tier comp. So people were really trying to force multicasters every single game, and the best player that could do it was none other than Milk. And so this video, it's a 23-minute long video, but if you have the time, I'll link it in the description. But I highly recommend watching this, because even though it's set 9, there's set 9 units and set 9 ideas, the general idea still stands. It's actually, funny enough, it's also around 2 costs. So it's 2 cost reroll, how to specifically one-trick it from any position, really. So I would recommend watching this if you have more questions about it, but it's not as simple as I just roll on 6, hit my units, D, and that's it. It's because if that's all you do, you're gonna buff war a lot. But enough of that. Let's talk about the variations. So first one is I think this is the most standard one that I think most people are playing. It's the Vanguard Syndra. It did really well, I believe, at EWC. I could be wrong. I'm not following it too closely, to be completely honest. But Syndra 3, board 3 is like the main sort of line, if you will. It's really simply, it's just because board 3 is just a fucking giga unit. It's like the best fucking like 3-cost tank that you can get, 3-star. It's really simple itemization. It just holds the spark, just redemption, gargoyles, whatever it may be. D-Claw is really good in this meta because everyone's playing Syndra, everyone's playing AP. So getting a D-Claw on this sounds fucking nuts to me, really good. Redemption, you don't see it too often because it uses belt and tier, and that's a Nashers and Shojin component. So you don't see redemptions too often, but you have extra tiers. This is really great. And then final item is obviously Spark, because you're going to need that shred. And yes, even though Syndra does have innate shred, it does not necessarily mean you don't need a Spark, because you have other units that still do AP damage, and getting that Spark there for that initial shred is really important. Again, very simple line. The meta line right now is that you just go level 8, you just play 3 mages, you meet the Syndra, all is good. Typically, it is Syndra 2 on 8, but as most of you already know, Syndra 2 is basically a 4.5 cost, as long as it has been stacking since at least 3.2 or earlier, right? And I don't know what to say about this, man, to be completely honest. Syndra 2 is just Syndra fucking 2. Just treat this as a 4 cost, and that should be enough to really warp your perception of the meta, because that's basically what this is. The next variation is shapeshifters. This was more prevalent at the beginning of the patch, and now it's less prevalent now because people realize that Vanguards is technically better because it is higher cap, because you have Mordekaiser 3 as an out. But do you really have it as an out? Probably fucking not, because you got like 3 other doofuses like fucking enforcing this shit. So I would argue like shapeshifters is like the safer approach, but the cap is slightly lower. But it depends, because sometimes you hit an early Briar and then like life is fucking good. In terms of the actual line itself, you have a bunch of different ways to play around it. The way that I like to go about it is that if I find that early Morgana, for example, it gives me 2 Witch, and then this open up Chrono Preservers, which, as if you can already guess, Zillion fits really nicely. And this is the general way I like to play around shapeshifters if I happen to lean this line, because everyone else is taking all the Vanguards. I've seen 0 Vanguards, but I saw like a Nico pair during stage 3, and I'm like, oh shit, like maybe I can play this instead. So that is the second mainline variation. And finally is Preservers. Preservers is sort of the initial mainline, now no longer mainline, because everybody has realized Rakan 2 is a dog shit unit. Morgana is a very good unit, but Rakan is shit, Bard is shit. So it's just kind of mid. So what ends up happening is that you end up playing flex around whatever. And funny enough, most of the times, in case you haven't realized already, this is basically the same as shapeshifters, because all you're doing is you're filling in the gaps with strong tanky units. Nasus 2 is, well, the best fucking 4-cost tank. What goes with Nasus? Oh diddly dong, it's fucking Briar. And then you can put in whatever the fuck you want. And it can literally be whatever. It could be more shapeshifters. It could be maybe a Milio for that early fairy, if for whatever reason you're lacking items. It could be whatever. It really does not matter. And again, you can also do the Nico as well for the shapeshifters, and a little bit of that witchcraft. You get the idea. Do you ever play Norra over Vex 2-star? Yes. I believe you're referring to this one, back with the mage variation or the Vanguard variation. Yes. I think Norra with best friends is better than Vex 2. I don't think Chrono is that good. I know some people, I know Disco, I was talking to him about this earlier today very briefly, but he thinks Vex 2 is better than Norra because of the Chrono and because it's extra frontline. I think it's fine. But I do think Norra, because of the way that Best Friends works, I think it's actually more AP overall for your main carry, who is typically going to actually be Syndra. But if you're main carrying or Karma instead, and like you're not even playing around the Syndra anymore, like let's say your items are over here, right, and it's probably gonna be a Rabadon instead of like an Ashes, so something like this, right? Typically this isn't in there anymore, so it goes like this, and then it could be like kind of fucking whatever. It's usually, what is it, 3 mage, 4 vanguard, it can literally be fucking anything. It does not matter. Like eldritch can be fine, Chrono can be fine, like this is fine-ish, I guess it's okay. But regardless, what I'm trying to get at is if your primary carry is Karma, I can see the argument that instead of Norra, you actually want Chrono, because this gives like, what, like 35 AP after the thing drops, after the timer, right? But actually, it would be for Chrono, I think. Nope, no, it's not. I don't fucking know. It's something. Arcana, sure. But because it specifically buffs your Karma, who's your primary carry, sure, I can understand it. But if you're playing around Syndra, which is, I would argue, like 90% of the time, you would actually play Norra instead. And then, yeah, and then this is a Syndra, and then you Yumi this. And because she's not Chrono, she doesn't get that extra 20 AP after the thing drops. So this is actually more, Best Friends is more AP for Syndra, if that makes sense. But anyways, that is, I believe, basically it that I want to talk about for compositions. I do want to leave you off with this. Stage 3 and Stage 4 are very prevalent this set. They are insanely prevalent, and I think a really good person to watch, if you don't really understand what I mean by Stage 3, like its relevance and how important it is to actually climbing. Right now, rank 1 in North America is Spencer TFT, and I will leave his Twitch in the description below as well, because I think when you watch the way that Spencer plays, he plays a very aggressive Stage 3, but you start to really piece together why, right? There's a lot of agency during Stage 3 and a lot of bleeding out that happens during Stage 3, where beforehand, you could just bleed out during Stage 3, and then forward 2, you just send it, and then you'll find your board, and if you're the one that hits, congratulations, you will stabilize so hard that you just kind of like went out the game. That's not entirely true with forecast anymore, so you really do need to play around Stage 3 a lot more and play with more agency. And again, I'll link his Twitch below. I would highly recommend going over one of his VODs. I will probably do a VOD review of his sometime later in the week. But it really does show that set 12, there's a lot of agency during mid-game, which is something that we haven't had in a very, very long time. So I would highly recommend check out his VOD, check out the VOD review that we will do sometime later in the future, because, like, to be completely honest, TFT, since I started playing, I don't know if I talked about this for this video specifically, but I've started set 7. I cannot remember a single patch where there was so much agency during Stage 3 and Stage 4 for any set. Now, that could be hyperbolic, because I don't remember. But from my experiences that I can remember off the top of my head, and albeit I do have bad memory, Stage 3 and Stage 4 has not felt this prevalent since I've started playing TFT. So I would really, really recommend, if you're struggling climbing on this set, because I definitely was, is look at the way that you're approaching Stage 3 and Stage 4, because it's not nearly as brain dead. And if anything, Stage 3 and Stage 4 are like the most important stages, I would argue, this set. So please keep an eye out for that. And that is my one quick tip for you if you are trying to climb this set, really, because, you know, charms. But that basically does it. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful. And yeah, take care. Happy climbing.